it's great to have a tool that is generic, but if it can talk your language, it's even more valuable. Are we at that point? I don't know, but I'm willing to push some of the chips in now. I think we're at a point where I can balance the upstart, finding the right upstart.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. Our broadcast today features a panel from our recent Metis Strategy Summit. The topic is aligning strategy, artificial intelligence, business, and governance. And the panelists who joined us were Ryan Snyder, the Chief Information Officer of Thermo Fisher Scientific, Ramkumar Rayapureddy, the Chief Information Officer of Viatris, and Allen Fazio, the Chief Information Officer of Houlihan Lokey. The session was moderated by Metis Strategy Co-Head of Executive Networks, Research and Media, Steven Norton. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Looking forward to this conversation and many others throughout the day. We thought we would start out with something a little bit light, which is how the heck are organizations managing all of the AI inside their companies? How are they making it align with strategy? I think it's fair to say that to some extent, we're all figuring it out still, trying to understand what models are going to work for the long term and also just trying to keep up with the extreme pace of change that's happening. So very excited for the conversation today to dig into some of those things, just hear what the folks here on the panel are learning, and hopefully continue the conversation. To my far right, we have Allen Fazio. He's the CIO of Houlihan Lokey, a global investment bank. He's been there for nearly 8 years. It leads global IT strategy and really making sure there's a seamless tech operations around the world. Prior to that, he held a number of senior technology leadership positions at Disneyland. Welcome, Allen. Thanks for joining. To his left, Ramkumar Rayapureddy, Chief Information Officer at Viatris, a global pharma company formed in 2020. It was a merger of Upjohn and Mylan that brought this company together. They work in over 165 countries and territories, nearly $15 billion in revenue. Ram's been with the company since 2014 and CIO since 2016. Ram, thanks so much for joining. And then finally, Ryan Snyder, SVP and CIO at Thermo Fisher Scientific, a $40 billion company, the world's leader in serving science. He joined in 2014 through an acquisition of Life Technologies and has been CIO since 2019. Guys, thank you so much for joining. Sure. Ryan, I thought we might start with you. I'd love it if you could just walk us through kind of how you make sure that the AI initiatives that are happening throughout Thermo Fisher are tying back up to the business strategy, and how do you monitor the health of that over time?
Well, yeah, I think, first of all, it's great to be with friendly fire. So I think a lot of us have to do these types of presentations around mixed environments, and that can be challenging to thread the needle of technology and business value. But I think that, for me, is kind of the point, is you really have to spend a lot of time with your teams on how are you going to measure this, right? It's moving very fast. And so I think having clear measurements, what we've done is we've coupled generative AI along with kind of other productivity type of measurements to make sure that it's not just measuring the effect of generative AI, it's that plus a combination of other tactics to ensure that you're getting real measurable results, right? Because we know some of these are going to be delayed. And then for us, at least, when we talk about AI, the applications ultimately land in 3 different categories. So one is, of course, internal productivity, which I think that's where a lot of CEOs are focusing heavily on. 2 is whatever your products or services are, how do you begin to embed it directly into those? And then the third for us is how do you actually influence your customer experience? And so I think having kind of that 3-pillar strategy, what it's done for us is it's allowed us to kind of create different measurement techniques to ensure that the different parts of the organization that care about those different aspects of what success means, you know, each of us can kind of create a measurement and put it right underneath each of those key pillars. So that's at least where we are so far. I mean, in a month it could change.
Absolutely. But I think that's right. Being able to understand who those core audiences are that you need to reach and make sure you have a metric that's aligned to each of those. Yeah. Allen, obviously a lot of your work is governed by the volatility of the markets and the changing economic picture and things of that nature, perhaps more so than some other organizations. How do you think about, in that background, what projects you tackle and where you decide to prioritize your investments in AI?
Yeah, so again, we focus on mergers and acquisitions, debt restructuring, asset valuation, super fun stuff. And when the markets are more volatile, it really comes to the question of what is something worth, right? What is something worth when interest rates went up? What is a company worth? With tariffs, what is a company worth? So when there's a changing dynamic, it makes it sometimes more difficult to figure out what is something worth between two parties. And as we look at AI, especially in investment banking, so I deal with very, very smart people who have been doing what they do for a long time, and I would say we are not the industry that is probably the most adaptive to new things. Investment bankers are very much set in the way they've done things, and they've been very successful in the way they've done those things. And so when we think about innovation, across our firm, it really has a couple of flavors. There's the what's your use case flavor? What's the use case? What are you trying to make better? But there's also let's see what happens. Right? In innovation, when companies are truly being innovative, you have to have room for, let's try some stuff. And in my prior life, I had Disney Imagineering, I had Disneyland, I had a couple of research labs, and you have to let people figure things out. And so from an innovation perspective, as I work with my bankers, there's things we're doing that are very much use case, does this work? But there are other things we're doing that are really, let me arm you with this and see what you do with it. And it's not the most senior people, it's not the MDs, it's the analysts and associates. These young people coming out of college who have been using this stuff to do their homework for the last 3 years, they're finding new ways to use this stuff. I have no idea. And so just staying on top of both avenues, but a structured approach, but a also less structured approach to seeing where things go, because I don't think any of us are smart enough to go, it's going to do X.
Yeah. It's been interesting just finding that right balance for your organization of letting all of the flowers bloom, as they say, versus really picking the couple of use cases that are really going to move the needle there. Thank you. Ram, would love to include you next. I know a big part of your work has been standardizing the platform in order to get kind of data where it needs to be in order to help these AI initiatives start to scale. Could you talk a little bit more about the platform standardization work that you're doing and how that ties into the bigger AI strategy?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think first, let me address what Alan said. I think we have also opened it up initially, but I think if you talked to me a year and a half back, my answer would have been, we just put some guardrails around, and to his point, we let people play with it. It did two things to us. One is, usually when something new comes, there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of people jump in, but over a period of time, the enthusiasm wanes for some people, and then there's some people who are champions who still get at it. The other one also, it helped us focus on which are the areas which are showing the most value and interest in. We coupled that in to make sure that we invest more in those areas. For example, for us, commercial and medical are two areas which showed a lot of enthusiasm and also a lot of value as we start putting it in. But then we started seeing that, right, with Gen AI especially, every day somebody throws up something new out there. Once you open it up, people are just trying to grab everything. And today this is cool, tomorrow something else is cool. I want to start using everything. That brings in a lot of risk into our environment. So we started slowly saying, okay, you can't have everything that's coming out every day. And one of the philosophies I have is, I'm not the person who uses it the first time it comes out. I'll give it some time. So we started bringing people back together and saying, at Viatris, these are some of the standard tools we start using. And you can find a way on how you can use those. Because at the end of the day, one tool might do some things a little better, but we found out that most of the time, based on what you're using, some of the standardization helps, because one, from an IT point of view, it makes my job a little bit more easier supporting them. And two is, we start putting better guardrails, but giving them the freedom. Once we define what that environment is, it gives more freedom for the people to play in that environment. And we found out that that is slowly starting to gain traction. Initially, there was some resistance to it. And the other benefit of opening it up initially was, this is one initiative, and I'm sure most of the people in this room agree, is we didn't have to push. The business is all for it. And so actually, sometimes we have trouble pulling people back and saying, this looks cool, but this is not adding value. Let's focus back on, and it drives sometimes my business crazy when I start asking them, has it increased your sales, or has it improved your productivity? We're getting there, but definitely the standardization has helped, and now putting some guardrails, it made my chief information security officer much more happier in our data privacy groups.
Ryan, how do you start to think about the kind of trade-offs between centralization or decentralization of a lot of these AI initiatives? Have you landed on something that's kind of working well for you now?
Yeah, it took us time, but we went down the path immediately of centralization. at the behest of the company leadership team, because there was initial instinct to the point that this could get out of control very quickly. And of course, in the early days, and to some degree still now, there was a lot of concern about data integrity, hallucinations, IP. So we created a center of excellence and really wanted that to be the anchor point for the company. The thought process was that as soon as we had a centralized team, to then federate it and democratize it, so to speak, across the organization. So I think that's, at least from my perspective, in a larger company, the right model to be in is you want to have some kind of central governance that's deciding tools, responsibility, tied out with security, privacy, legal, compliance, all those sorts of things. But then you really do have to thread that needle where it can't become the bottleneck, right? It's a tool that's just moving too fast to have one team really be the governor and kind of the rate limiter on everything going on. And so we are a huge advocate of decentralized creativity and just, letting people experiment. It may not always be the most useful use cases, but in terms of like driving real business value, a lot of those are going to be the top-down big ideas. But I feel like anytime you're going to try to drive any transformation, if the team that has to transform is familiar with the tools, i.e. you've democratized it, the ability for them to participate and feel like they're part of the change, you have a much higher degree of success, I think, if you approach it that way.
Yeah, well said. I want to put the question to both of you too, just to see, does that rhyme with how you're doing things at your organizations, or are you doing it slightly different? Alan, maybe over to you.
No, I think, again, I think this is great advice. And I think going back to what Ram said around guardrails, right? If you can give people a safe place to be innovative and creative, and they know where they, where I always say, where the fence shocks them if they get out of bounds, they're much more creative in that space. It's when they don't know the rules, and I think that's one of the things that leaders can do for their organization, is clarify the rules as quickly as possible, right? As soon as something comes out, have an opinion, get people together, here are the new rules. Because the rules are changing as fast as the tool sets. And the faster you can give people rules to work within, the more they can be innovative. And it's when they don't have the rules, am I allowed to do this? Am I not? Can I do? That slows everything down. So again, helping define those guardrails as quickly and as clearly as possible. I mean, the example I use is everyone here is, oh, note taking is awesome. Get your co-pilot or whatever to take your notes in a meeting. Unless you're highly regulated financially, because then the minute it's recorded and written by an AI tool, it now must be kept forever for the SEC. Oh, great. And then you find out we're not very good at being recorded. I just learned very quickly, you do not want to record my meeting. And it's not just me, but hypothetically, a lot of us start the meeting off by complaining about other humans, hypothetically, and that we don't want recorded and put in the notes, okay? And so we've learned very quickly, we said, change the rules. We're deleting the verbatim within 24 hours, but we'll keep the notes for, again, so quickly, the rules themselves help dictate how fast people can be creative.
Well said.
Yeah, I think we are in a similar path. To Ryan's point also, right? If you try to do everything centrally, at some point you won't have enough people also. You will stifle innovation. So it's a good balance. So we definitely put the governance in place. And especially with Gen AI, I think it blurs the lines between what tech people are or what business people are. And then I agree with Ryan, giving it to the business people, having that knowledge built, will help them do much more creative work than somebody in technology coming in and telling them this is how you do it, as long as the guardrails are there. And this is true anywhere, right? When I was growing as an automation engineer, I found out I could do the best testing of a tool and put it out there. The operator finds a way to break it. You wouldn't think the creative ways they use it. And with Gen AI, that has become exponential. So, but having those guardrails and making sure people understand the rules is important.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about just how fast things are moving and the new tools coming out all the time. Alan, how do you start to think about that balance of working with new startups that are coming onto the scene versus sticking with some of the established players? What does that balance look like within Houlihan?
Yeah, yes and. So 3 years ago, we started working with all the major players. We've had Oracle's AI team in, Microsoft's AI team in. We've been working with the major players for the last couple of years. And I would argue we weren't ready to push the chips in with some of the startups yet. That's changing right now. We're actually doing a big shootout right now with about 9 different firms because we think it's time now for some of the smaller ones. They've got something that's unique or different from the larger box guys. And so It takes a lot of dinners and a lot of talking to people and a lot of visits up to Silicon Valley. But now we're starting to see, again, not from a large language perspective, maybe I call it small language perspective, is watching our data underneath AI and having tools that understand the world of finance and know the difference between financial terms and things like that. And I would expect the same in healthcare. It's great to have a tool that is generic, but if it can talk your language, it's even more valuable. Are we at that point? I don't know, but I'm willing to push some of the chips in now. I think we're at a point where I can balance the upstart, finding the right upstart. And by the way, it'll be like a 6-month or 1-year deal because I don't know if they're going to be winning a year from now. So it's a little different game than with the bigger box guys. But it's time. I think we've had enough playing with some of the startups to realize that there's enough now on the table to make an investment.
Yeah. And I assume also being able to go in and test out the technology and know pretty quickly now what really is going to deliver or not, or at least have a better sense.
Yeah, because I mean, every test we've done hasn't been a home run. They've all been, that's interesting, and they're almost there. There's a piece missing that before it becomes this, wow, it spreads like wildfire. And it's getting closer and closer every time. But again, everything we've done with all the tools has value, but not the greatest, like, oh my God, stop everything we're doing and do the new way. This is the new way of running our business. We're not quite there yet.
Ram, earlier you mentioned the role of champions in kind of spreading the AI word around the organization. There's a big pro in that, right? You have evangelists for all the new tools, but you alluded to this earlier. There's a bit of a risk as well, right? That maybe they're pushing a little too far based on the guardrails that exist. How do you balance that and think about, really making the most of the champions that you have while also making sure things are staying within the bounds that they need to?
Yeah, that is something we are still figuring out. But I found out right yesterday I was finishing a call with our commercial champion. I realized now I need to start committing some more time to them because they go so far ahead. And all of a sudden, the challenge I'm seeing is, for example, ChatGPT becomes the answer for everything, which is not true. There are better solutions depending on what. So one is trying to find and spend the time with these champions on a much more regular basis and having regular checkpoints. And the other is obviously the guardrails. And we are getting more and more focused now on the business case aspect of it also, making sure that because the enthusiasm is so big, people start thinking it's the magic bullet. So I realized I need to spend a little bit more time with these champions, or the core team has to spend a little bit more time on the champions. So before they go too far, if there is a need to pull some of those things back, that's how we are doing it right now. That's the plan. And we are also trying to bring in, initially, I was more reluctant to work with startups because there was a concern around controls, right? Are they secure enough and things like that? But we have now opened up to start working with more startups because we see sometimes in the startup world, a lot of creative solutions come up much faster. Obviously, then our partnership with them is because being in a regulatory world, bringing in the compliance aspects and the security aspects to it.
Yeah. Ryan, have you seen something similar just in terms of the ability for Thermo to work with those startups and really continue to experiment?
Yeah, I would say it's getting harder. Having 130,000 colleagues in the company, it's not an hour that goes by that I don't get like, my brother-in-law's got this super cool .ai company and we should totally use them. I mean, those hit my inbox all the time, as I'm sure it does everywhere. I would say from my perspective, I've been pleasantly surprised with how the big technology players have, I would say, learned from the sins of the past and how they got eclipsed so quickly. They're all over AI. And I do think that in terms of general use, the tools are great, right? I think you can pick any one of 3 or 4 players and probably be okay. So we've tried to channel the enthusiasm of the startup community more towards specific use cases, right? Where if we have a use case where we know there's a large payoff potentially down the lane, that's where we'll experiment. But from a governance perspective, we've created an AI registry to make sure that we're sweeping the network and finding all of the different AI tools that are out there and trying to mop up the stuff that is really just, ChatGPT wrappers or just things that ultimately are, not really creating any sort of additional value beyond the general purpose tools that exist. So that's that's worked with us, I would say, worked for us rather reasonably well at this point.
Yeah. I like the registry idea and being able to filter all those emails. So one of the things that starts to get interesting as this continues to evolve is also data, how it's managed, who owns it, how it moves. Ram, have you made any adjustments to data ownership, or how are you thinking about the ways in which data now needs to be governed in order for these use cases to take off?
Yeah, obviously, data becomes very important, right? The sanity or the clarity or the integrity of your data drives what the solutions will come out of, right? So we have worked very hard, and it's still a work in process, to get as much as of our data into one central platform and also start cleaning up. If you look at the history of Mylan and Upjohn, it has grown through mergers and acquisitions. So you can imagine the number of disparate systems that are across globally and trying to clean up. And the same stuff is called by different names in different places. In some ways, Gen AI is helping because it can sort through some of that and it can find the similarities and pull the right data together. But we are working more and more to get data into one central place and also start assigning. Initially, I think if you ask 4 or 5 years back, data was still looked at IT as being the steward. Now that has changed. So we're finding, again, our business champions who are the people who are identified who own these data, and working with them and putting a data structure in place and a governance in place for that.
Got it. Allen, how's it working at Houlihan Lokey?
Yeah, so we use a metaphor for all AI around a horse and a car, right? We're moving between an old way of doing things and a new way of doing things. And when we put data in that metaphor, again, everything Ram just said is like, okay, yes, data is more important. Accuracy is more important. If you talk to your veteran data folks, the horse people, they'll talk about things like, oh, we got to do MDM and master data management. We got to put metadata around everything, and we got to put our data in these places. I'm like, is that the old way of doing things, or is that the new way of doing things? And so we're kind of caught between two worlds now, because now we've got these AI vendors coming in going, you don't have to move your data around. We can do that with AI. I'm like, oh, is that the car way of doing data now? Or so we're caught between both worlds of data. When we started this process, it was like, I'm going to do an AI tool. Then it was, no, I'm going to get the data tool to make the data better for the AI tool. Wait, no, I'm going to get the security tool before I do the data tool to get the. I'm like, okay, I can't afford all the tools to even get off the ground for creativity. Yeah. But for data itself, it's yes, it has to be more accurate. It's being used in ways that it wasn't being used before. But how we get there and how we get that answer, I've got guys who are like, oh, let's go create new folders and put data around the folder. I'm like, again, is that the old way of thinking or the new way of thinking? And we're caught kind of between both worlds right now in the data space.
Yeah, you teed up my next question really well. For Ryan, have you found with AI there's actually a way to accelerate some of that data cleansing and improve data accuracy, or is it?
I hope so. I'm a big metaphor person as well, and I always say at our company, it's like my kids' rooms. They're just perpetually in a state of being unclean. You clean them up, 10 minutes later you walk by, you're like, oh, what just happened? It's just a complete mess again. And that is it just feels like we are in a never-ending do loop of cleaning rooms across the organization. We're a big decentralized company, so it's challenging. I would say, I absolutely agree that I'm hopeful, knock on wood, that we are entering in a new era around data management, where it's kind of this old way, new way. Because certainly the old way is very challenging, especially if you're an M&A driven company. I mean, it just becomes a bit of a nightmare. And so I'm optimistic especially with kind of where the models have gone with reasoning. There does seem to be some, you can kind of squint into the future and potentially see a day when, the artificial intelligence will be able to kind of autonomously clean a lot of the data, especially as it gets to learn more and more about kind of how your company operates. So that's my aspirational hope for sure.
Ryan, can we steal that? Because I'm going to have my data team talking about Ryan's kids' rooms now. So
Absolutely.
All right, absolutely.
Yeah. But if you ask him, his kids will tell. As long as the room is unclean, they know where things are. Once you clean them up, they can't find them.
Well, with the couple of minutes that we have left, I'd love to just kind of look into the future. As you all mentioned, this is a work in progress in so many ways, and it's going to change next week. It's going to change next month. It's not showing any signs of slowing down. But if you think about kind of where things are right now, and if you could snap your fingers, one thing that could make your AI strategy better, or kind of an ideal thing that you would have, what might that be? Just want to do a little pie in the sky. Ryan?
I would say a couple things. One is we centralize to start, but then the center of gravity being there, it's very challenging to get a team that you've just built up to then say, okay, now let go of some of the control. So we were probably a little bit slow to decentralize. So I would say that balance to your earlier question of central versus not centralized, that's one to continually monitor and make sure that you get that right. The other one, maybe just real quick, is I think role model leadership is incredibly important. It sounds so simple, but it's something I challenge my own team on, is like, how often are you using these tools, right? Or are you just telling the organization that it's super important they use it? And I want to see the product, are you just delegating? That's kind of what executives do. And, but how much are you walking the walk? Because people see that and they know. So I think ensuring that leadership is staying kind of active in the usage of what you're trying to transform, I think is super important as well.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Sometimes it seems like there's a hesitance to say, oh, I used AI to do this thing. But if you really want to push this change, it's learning how to be more open about that. Yeah. Ram, how about you?
Yeah, I think one thing I see is definitely the blurring of the lines between technology and business. Maybe it'll be a good thing where you get more of it embedded in the business. It's scary to be an IT person. I have a son who's a computer science grad. He says he stopped coding because he thinks AI will be coding everything. So he has to focus on something else. So I thought that was interesting. But getting back, I think it's important to keep the teams educated, right? One of the things I challenged my team, I was talking to my team, to Ryan's point, is how much of this are we using? So my tech team gets really tired of me reading all the articles. I read Ryan's article also and saying like, what are we doing in this area? So they keep telling me, stop reading. You also start doing some work. Don't send me these articles, but keep challenging. The other is obviously I'm challenging my team to get much more focus educated in this. So we are going to start pushing some certifications, especially on the IT team. And we already have the concept where I strongly encourage my teams to spend days with the business. So if I have teams supporting manufacturing, I have them actually visiting the plant, spending a day in the plant and come up with ideas. That is helping us now in the Gen AI space because, to Ryan's point, people at home are much more educated sometimes on some other things. And so it's encouraging that dialogue. And I see that continuing. But definitely it puts a little bit more pressure on the technology teams to stay ahead, to stay educated, and be much more engaged with their business partners.
Finally, over to you.
I'm looking for that wildfire moment this year. And what I mean by that is, one, I'm a lousy camper. I'm horrible out camping. And my favorite moment is when you're trying to build a fire and you're just getting it started. I'm the guy who throws like 6 giant logs on it and goes, burn, do something, right? And so I think that ignition moment is what we're looking to happen over the next year or so. And what I mean by that is there's going to be a great idea this year that cuts something that takes 6 hours down to 10 minutes. And if the person who does that keeps it and goes, I'm now more productive, the fire doesn't go. But if they share that, if we're constantly looking for the fire to spark and are ready to move that idea through the organization very quickly, we're going to have that ignition moment where it's like now no one does the 6-hour thing anymore. They do the 10-minute thing. And as we start to see those, all of a sudden the value, the understanding, AI will catch fire at that moment. And I think we're really close to that moment. And it won't be everyone. Not everyone is built for this moment, right? And so we call it the toaster test. If I put a toaster in front of you and a screwdriver and leave the room for 5 minutes, are you one of the people who take it apart, right? Or are you one of the people who plug it in, stick the screwdriver in it? There's different type of people, right? Some people just look for toast. Can I cook toast? I'm looking for the people who take apart the toaster. And if I can find those people and find that ignition moment and get them to share it versus hold it, again, that's when innovation happens. Again, we were, anyone who was around late 90s, it was the pivot table. Excel was okay. And then the pivot table came in and it spread like wildfire, especially in finance. We're looking for that moment in this year. So,
excellent. Well, with that, I think it's a good place to end. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks.
For a good session. And all right, we'll get ready for the next one.
thanks. Sign good.